Good evening, welcome in RNQ Isino classes, block number 3, relation of being and beings, unit number 4, being and the problems of one and many. 4.1 Introduction. Discussions on the problem of one and many has been on the increase throughout the centuries. It has been a much debated question both in the East and in the West. It was first posed in the West by the pre-Socratic philosophers. The problem is implicitly present in the discussions of Heraclitus 542-480 BCE, and its explicit starting point in the fragments of Parmenides' poem, which had also much influenced the metaphysical thinking of Plato 428 to 348 BCE and Aristotle 384-322 BCE. Lively debates on the problem are also predominantly present in the philosophers of the East, especially in the Vedic, Vedantic, and non-Vedic systems of India. In this article, we examine only the most important origins of Western and Indian philosophies on the issues that definitely influenced the latter thinkers of various schools of thought, so as to arrive at a fair synthesis of the same. 4.2 Early Western Perspectives. Heraclitus. For Heraclitus, the fundamental thought is that the one universe is in a state of ceaseless change. One can't step twice into the same river, for other waters are ever flowing on to signalize the notions of insistent activity. Heraclitus chooses as a first principle the ever living first, which is the vital principle in the original organism and the essence of the soul. The fire of Heraclitus is not the abiding substratum of his predecessors, but that which is constantly being transformed into other things. The primal unity itself is in constant motion and change. Its creation is destruction, and its destruction is creation. This view is opposed by Parmenides, who interprets reality to be permanent without any change. Parmenides, the metaphysician of the electric school, challenges Heraclitus, teaching that everything changes, that fire becomes water, and water earth, and water fire, that things first are and then are not. How can a thing both be and not be? How can anyone think such a contradiction? To say that it is to say that something is and something is not, or if being has become, it must either have come from non-being or from being it from non-being. It has come from nothing, which is impossible. If from being, then it has come from itself and is identical with itself, and thus has always been. Then it is evident that from being only being can come, that whatever is always has been and always will be, that everything remains what it is. Hence, there can be only one eternal, unchangeable being. Plato 428-348. The idea or form combines or holds together the essential qualities common to many particulars. The essence of things consists in their universal forms. The ideas or forms are not merely thoughts in the minds of humans, or even in the mind of God. The divine thought is thought is itself directed toward them. Plato conceives them as existing and for themselves possessing substantiality, that is, their substances, real or substantial forms, the origin, eternal, transcendent and archetypes of things existing prior to things and apart from them, and thus influenced by the changes to which they are subject. The particular objects of perceptions are imperfect copies or reflections of the central patterns. Particulars may come and go, but the idea many particular objects copies, but there is only one idea of class of things. The variety and diversity of independent forms or ideas is endless. Aristotle 384 to 322, for him metaphysics is the first philosophy that deals with us, with the unmoved mover. The unmoved mover is the first being or first substance, as the unmoved mover is the first. The philosophy which deals with this kind of being is the first philosophy, since God is the first being who is studied in the first philosophy. It is also called theology. In other words, according to Aristotle, metaphysics is the first philosophy, and the science of being, as being, it is the science of substances, especially of the first substance of the first cause, which is immovable, eternal, independent, and without matter, that is God. The first philosophy or ontology, it is at the same time theology. The object of metaphysics is all beings, visible and invisible. It investigates all beings insofar as they are being, the totality of beings and all particular domains of beings. 4.3 Early Indian perspectives. In India, the problem of one and many is expressed through a rich variety of thoughts and practices that have developed over more than 3,000 years. There is no single Indian view on the problem, but rather a plurality of ways of understanding and interpreting reality as reflected in the Vedas, and particularly in the classical systems of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. The problem becomes thematic at various levels and in different contexts. In debates concerning the status of certain concepts as the soul, God, substances, universals, time changes, permanence, impermanence, etc. When worship was accorded to any of the Vedic deities, the worships tended to make that deity the supreme one, having all the attributes of a monotheistic deity, of whom all other bad forms or manifestations. This is known as henotheism, distinct from monotheism. Of course, this these synthesizing processes, classifications of good gods, simplifications of divine attributes and powers are all evidences of the problem of one and many. The Vedic Indians were sufficiently logical to realize that the attributes of creations of ruling of the world could be granted only to one being, namely Prajapati, the lord of creatures, Bhasya Karmana, the world maker. Thus the logic of religious faith asserted itself in favor of religious monotheism and metaphysical monism. The monistic emphasis led the Vedic thinkers to look upon the Vedic deities as different names of the one universal Godhead, the real that lies behind the tide of temporal change is one spoken of in different ways. The one Vedas, all things just as they are, or either Akasha Vedas, the universe, the one animates the world just as the life breath prana animates the human body. The Vedic sages did not stop with a mythological view of reality. They did not rest content until they had a vision of the ultimate unlimited being, Tadakkam. The hymen where the unlimited being appears is the Nasadiya Sukta, which has been praised as containing the flower of Indian thought. This hymen is the quintessence of Indian metaphysics. All things are traced to one principle, opposites like being and non-being, life and death and night and day are shown to be the self-unfolding of that one. Through the Upanishads do not work out a logically coherent system of the problem of one and many. They give us a few fundamental doctrines which are truly metaphysical. Atman and Brahman. The term Atman was used in the Rig Veda to denote the unborn part of the immaterial soul of human. All Atman is the essence of or ultimate reality of anything. The Atman is the changeless principle behind the changing factors in human. These changeless aspects of human can be discovered only after a process of introspection which helps us transcend phenomenal aspect to reach the inner reality of Atman. The word Brahman is derived from the root brh, which means to grow, to evolve. In the beginning it means sacrifice, then prayer, and then it acquired its present meaning of ultimate reality. It is the ultimate cause of the universe which potentially burst forth as nature and soul. Thus Brahman transcends all and yet underlies all as their background. The lower is transformed to the higher. Brahmana is the immanent inner controller of all Antaryamin and the self of all Sarvabhutantaratma. As the spokes are contained in the axle and the wheels, all beings are contained in Brahmana. In the early Upanishads, Brahmana stands for the superpersonal ground of the cosmos objectives, and Atman is the principles of individual consciousness objective. But further thinking about the unity of the ultimate reality, the one without a second complied, the Upanishadic scares to resume that there can't be a distinction between the essence or inner reality of the cosmos, the Brahmana, and the inner reality of consciousness can't be thought of as being in any way other than the consciousness seen in the individual humans. 4.4.
इतना टेंशन कम था कि सोना और टेंशन दे दिया। अरे जब टेंशन होता है ना तभी चैलेंज जीतने का मजा आता है टुकड़ा। आपकी बात सही है दादाजी, पर पता नहीं क्या सबके सारे आइडिया टॉप पे जा रहे हैं। पिछली वैसे ये कल्पना करता था कि जब सोनू बिटिया अचानक आएगी भिड़े और मास्टर अभी की आंखों के सामने तो उनके चेहरे पे कैसे खुशी आएगी, कितनी खुश होंगे वो।
4.4
मौका मिलेगा नहीं अब। लगता है सोनू की आंखों के नाम कटने वाली है।
4.4 Being as one in many.
अब क्या करेंगे दादाजी?
The problem of one and many is fundamental to human experience. Both poles seem to be equiprimordial to any intelligent awareness. The many is inescapable for any experience which is spatio-temporal in its form, consisting in the manifold sensations that are spread out in space and that succeed one another in time. But to a human experience, there also belongs from the beginning a unity which allows the manifold items in it to be ordered and related among themselves. If this did not happen, there would be only a chaotic flux of impressions comparable to be flux which briefly passes through a consequenceless when we are overcome by dizziness or are about to lose consequenceless is this unity of experience imposed entirely by the human mind given giving an illusion of unity that might be the Kantian epistemology in which it is the human mind which imposes unity upon the given forms of space and time by unifying the spatio-temporal data brought together under the categories of the understanding in the unity of appreciation. However, it would be impossible for the mind to impose a unity on the manifold sensations unless the conditions for such a unity were already there in the sensations themselves. If the flux of sensations were endlessly varied, we could never emerge from the state of dizziness, leaving us helpless to construct any kind of unity. But in fact, the same sensations keep coming back and we are able to recognize them. It's the repetition, the recurrence of what has been that makes possible the constructions of a unified experience. This repetition lies in the given the raw data of experience. Unity then is not a creation of the human mind but a discovery of what has already been there, a discovery which is never complete. There has also been in many individuals and schools of thought a metaphysical awareness of this discovery of the underlying unity of all things. Such persons and schools have been seized of an awareness of a single reality embracing all the manifestations of the manifold in itself and expressing itself in them. The metaphysical vision of an all-embracing unity has found expressions in various monistic philosophies. The most illustrious representative philosopher or monism in ancient Greek was Parmenides. For him, reality is one and unchanging. That which changes is that which is not, and thus unreality. The thought or Parmenides may be compared with that of Sankara. For him too, that there is one unchanging reality, Brahmana. But from the earliest time there have been also philosophers who are openly pluralist in ancient Greek. The priority of the multiple and the changing over the one has usually been ascribed to Heraclitus, but the typical pluralist philosophy has also been empiricist in contrast to the rationalistic approach of monism evident in modern and contemporary times, reaching its most extreme form in Nietzsche and the postmodernists who championed pluralism and contingency. For them, there is no beginning, no end, and no absolute center, but just endless proliferations of continent occasions. These have lies at the opposite extreme of Brahmandis, Sankara, and the like. Perhaps it is difficult to find anywhere a thoroughgoing monism or pluralism. Most advocates of monism have thought of the one implying at least some sort of definition itself. There in tacit agreement with Radhakrishnan's view that the one is so far from being empty that it is characterized by fullness, and that it surpasses compassion. At the other extreme, it is possible to find a through-going pluralism here. Even Nietzsche, who denied that there is either beginning or end or middle, nonetheless through thought a doctrine of eternal recurrence. Thus we have to conclude that the extreme forms, both the monism and the pluralism, are untenable. In the words of John Macaria, the highest unity is that which already conceals within itself the diversity. Will see diversity devoid of anything unifying is unthinkable. The one and the many do not stand in stark oppositions to each other, for each implies the other. But how do they imply each other? The questions of their mutual implications calls for further ontological analysis. The philosophical positions of monism, dualism, and of radical and of radical pluralism all depend upon the ontological solutions offered to the problem of one and many. But how can being be identical and diverse at the same time? In reality, monism, dualism, and pluralism are extreme positions that create the illusion of solutions to the problem of one and many, which can be briefly explained in this: the very being belongs to being. Being rebels itself is an absolute everywhere. Every finite being is a whole being, a complete being, yet it is not the whole of being, for it does not contain all reality, since there are beings outside of it. A particular being participates in being. The particular being that participates in being is a complete being, is a subsistent whole, unlike a part which is not a complete whole. The particular being which is limited is an imperfect being. It does not contain other particular beings, nor does it possesses their perfection. Hence, it does not contain all perfection. Consequently, it is imperfect. It does not mean that it is unfinished in itself. The perfection of every particular being belongs itself whole to being, and by thing token it is to be distinguished from every other being. In this way, being possesses an absolute character. It is not opposed to anything. Consequently, it penetrates and envelopes everything. Nevertheless, being manifests some relativity, since the real is broken up into multiple unity which participate in being. In other words, the participations of being in being is an undeniable fact. But how can we explain the fact that the distinct beings in beings preserve their autonomy? This is the fundamental metaphysical problem of one and many that calls for fresh attempts. I am aiming at a solutions. Being as one in many can be the result of such an attempt. Being is one. Being is that which is in some way, insofar as it is in some way it is one. Being is many. Being is that which is in some way, insofar as being is in some way. Each being is in its own way, insofar as each being is in its own way. All beings are in their own ways. When all beings are in their own ways, there would be a plurality of beings that are many. In this sense, being is many. Being is one in many. Being is that which is one some way. Insofar as being is in some way, it is in. However, each being is in its own way. Insofar as each being is in its own way, all beings are in their own ways, which are many. In other words, being which is in some way is also in its own way. Being is and being that is one is in many. Therefore, being is one in many. 4.5. Finite being as one in many, actions as only in many. For Blondel, action is a complex term of one in many that stands for the entire human experience, concepts within the framework of humans' basic needs and tendencies. It is the activity of whole human, the synthesis of thought, will, and being itself. The greater and the nobler is human activity. The greater and the noble is one. Actions is the most universal and unavoidable fact in human life. It is also personal obligations that may demand a hard choice, a sacrifice, and even death. Even suicide itself is in act. In other words, to refuse to choose it is make a choice. One always will something, for otherwise one's act of willing would be a plurality negative one. Now the minimum object we can assign to the well, it has been proved that it is impossible for the bill not to bill is to bill nothing or nothingness. It has uh, lenient, but it is possible to will nothing or to make nothingless. That is non-being. That is non-being the term of our act or of willing. Evidently not, because the negation is only conceivable in terms of an affirmation. Every negation implies an affirmation of something. Thus, the human will always tends towards something or being which underlies, penetrates, transforms, and unifies every actions composed of two elements, exercise and determinations. Exercise is the inner element of the operations which accounts for its taking place. Determinations is the element of the operation which specifies or distinguishes the operations from other operations. Action consists of exercise and determinations. Action is in the elements of the actions. The one action is in it many elements. Thus, the one action is in many actions. We know well that a finite being is as structured as one operations is the as the operations is, so the being is the operations is composed of exercise and determinations are one in many. Hence, a finite being person must also be composed of one in many. The finite being is composed of being is and the essence is composed of substance, and excellent substance is composed of prime matter and substantial form. The prime matter is in potency, as the substantial form is in act. Being in essence, a finite being has to be identical with being of being is immanent in this finite being, because this big being is the identical is not perfect, because alongside this being there are also other finite beings. Being insofar as it is immanent in this being through a certain identity, it is not unlimited being. For unlimited being transcendent this particular being. The immanent being is a modified finite or limited being. It is the proper being of the particular being. The limiting principle essence is neither being nor being. Nevertheless, the limiting principle constitutes this being as this being, and express the modifications of the unlimited being into a limited being. This and nothing else. Whatever essence it has, it derives from the relative oppositions to being, to which as a modifying principle it refers by its whole nature and form which it also has its modifying capacity. Hence, when it lets itself be modified or limited and according to the limitations, the finite being participates in unlimited being. The unlimited being which transcends all modes does not fully coincide with the proper being of each being, which is only a limited way. The finite being is through participations in the unlimited being. To explain this participation, we must admit that within the finite being there is a distinction between its proper being and the principle through which being becomes its own limited being, that is its own modifying and limiting essence. The relativity of essence and being can't be fully reciprocal. Being as being transcends all modes of being, and therefore all modifications through essence will. The essence is fully relative of being. However, in the finite being has let itself be modified in a sense. The essence is prior to bring being insofar as the mode modifies being into being. But this priority is not absolute, for the mode also arises from being, which includes in itself in itself the possibility of being finite becoming incarnate in the finite. Hence, being is prior to essence. For being makes the mode made a mode of being, perhaps a limited being, points to a ground which is transcendent not only relatively to finite beings but absolutely. This one absolute ground of beings is in essence the one is in many. Being if as the principle of all limitations of being should be something process and being out only in essence, then it is a merely possible and not real. The real differs from the possible because of being in other words, being is that in being which makes it real, distinguishing it from a merely possible being. It is the principle of perfections or unlimitations of all beings. Being is the inner principle or universal ground of what that which really is, and through which beings are in themselves essence as the principle of limitations. When we ask about something what it is, we suppose that we know already that it is certain. What in this way it differs from the whatness of all other beings. If it differs in this way from that which it is, then beings possess being not to its fullest extent but only within determined limits. That through which a being is that which it is essence is that through which is a being is posited in a determined limited manner of being of a course. Essence implies a negation of being. It is not a negation we suppose is the being of a being and reduces it to nothing, but it is a negation which limits its being and reduces it to a finite being. It is not total or absolute, but a partial and relative negations which refers to a certain determinations and denies their presence in this being. Such a relative negation is also a negative relations as it refers one being to all others and distinguishes it from them. Or relative negations is determined negations determined by that which it refers. Hence, the fitnesses is always unnecessarily determined. Fitness is determined by being which is present in every finite being. Substance or accidents. Finite beings are composed of a relativity permanent principle which remains from primarily the same throughout secondary changes and secondary principle. These principles may come and go without producing a change in the primary mode of being. Being the relatively permanent principle is called substance and secondary principles are called accidents. The notions of substances and accidents may be acquired from the analysis of an external experience. For instance, our external senses reveal to us an unripe or orange as a concrete whole which is extended in space, green, colored, sour, etc. The intellect conceives the qualities which may comes and go as determines which affect something under under earth. These changes and is modified by them. The difference between the determinations and the subject is expressed by the notions accidents and substance which correspond to a reality existing in the external world. Thus we may interpret substance as the being in itself of a finite essence, which is the basic inner principles of permanence of or continuity of that being, which becomes a being is originally constituted by its act of existing and essence. It is a posited as a limited but a real being which exists in itself autonomously as a substance. It is being in itself and not another accident. On the other hand, is that which is not in itself but in another. It is a mode of being but not autonomous. It does not exist in itself but in another. It is whatever is added in any way to another determined in its being. There is no accident which is not permitted and penetrated by substances which sustains and supports them. The one substance is that in many accidents form in matter. All material beings possess the principles of materiality. It is not a being at all but principles of material beings as such, hence it can't be known scientifically, empirically, but metaphysically. These principles of materiality is prime matter. It is the common substantial principle found in all material bodies. It is wholly without determinateness in itself. It can't exist itself, is the substantial but an incomplete substantial principle. It requires another substantial principle to exist, or rather to give it existence in a determinate body. The other substantial principle, with the exceptions of the human soul, is also an incomplete substantial principle. The prime matter is the determinable element, and the substantial form is the determining element. It is also pure potentiality, as it is a pure capacity for existence in a material body. It is a capacity which must be filled up, determined, and made into the only existable body by a substantial principle other than itself, since the result of the union of this determining principle with prime matter is a single bodily substance. The union itself must be substantial union, the substantial fusing of two substantial principles into an actuality, which is a third thing. This third thing is neither prime matter alone, a substance form alone, but an existing body of a specific kind. It is that which makes any body a body, not activity, but passively receiving the impress, the union of the substantial form. For the whole character of prime matter is its passivity, its inertness, its indifference to become this particular kind of body rather than another. In a word, its indeterminateness, its potentiality. In this way, we can affirm the classical Aristotelian assertions. Primal matter is that constitutive principles of corporeal substance, which of itself is quite indeterminate, and hence can be determined to form corporeal substance. To illustrate the various senses in which the term form is used, we shall consider a few instances of its use. Form is frequently used as a synonym for outline, or say we speak of the oval form of a race course, of the symmetrical form, the form of a drawing. It is also means a plan, a program, or program, a record, or a form sheet to be filled. It is often used for good conditions, and the golfer is said to be informer at the top of his form. The adjective of form that is formal is often employed to indicate a certain dignity or a certain decorum, invoking precise details of address or conduct. Thus, we speak of a formal dress, formal occasions, formal introductions, etc. to philosophers. Form may mean that which determines a thing, sets in it in its being, in its essence, in its substance, in its accidents, in its actuality. Any determining element is a being in form when it's spoken of as corporeal substance. The term refers to substantial form, which makes a bodily substance and an existing reality, actuality. It is the substantial form of human which makes the one bodily being a human being, that which sets and determines a substance in its actual being, and makes it a substance of this precise kind of or essential nature is its substantial form. Matter is there in every finite material. Substantial form, matter is in form one material principle. Prime matter is there in very material. Substantial form, one is in many. Act in potency. The term act comes from the Latin root actus, which means an entity of whatever kind which perfects and determines a thing in its brings or perfection. It includes the power of faculty, operations of the faculty, accidents, essence, substance, form, and act of existing. Whatever a being has or is in a positive manner is an act. It is perfection itself. There are as many kinds of acts as there are kinds of being. For every beings as such is the perfection. Potency comes from the Latin root potentia, which means power. Potency is the capacity of an act. It is the capacity or aptitude in reference to something which a being is not or has not, but which it can be or can or and receive. For example, hydrogen and oxygen has the act of oxygen, but both have the potency of water. There are actually hydrogen and oxygen, but potentially water on the other hand is actually water, but it is potentially hydrogen and oxygen. Since the water has the aptitude to be resolved into them, there are two main kinds of potency: activity potency and passive potency. Active potency is the capacity of communicate act or perfection to another. It is a power of action, such as the power of hearing. Since such a power in itself already confers certain perfection upon its subject, it is an act with respect to its subject. Hence, it may also be called fast act. Passive potency is the capacity to receive act or perfections from another. Example: a child has the capacity for acquiring knowledge from parents and teachers. There are two kinds of passive potency: determinate passive potency and indeterminate passive potency. Determinate passive potency is that which contains an act and is in potency to some further act. Example: substance for accidents, or the complete essence for the act of existing. Indeterminate passive potency is the principles of an act, but which itself contains no act. It is pure potency. Example: prime matter act is there in every material finite being which is in potency. The one act is there is several potency that a material finite being processes. We have already seen actions and finite being is as one in many. If infinite being is one in many, unlimited being from which the finite being proceeds, and in which every finite being is, should also be one in many.